Thank you for, excuse me, thank you. Today is Monday, December 3rd, 2018, and we are in the, I don't know where we are. We're in the second floor meeting room in the Town of Groton's Town Hall. On the agenda today, we will have announcements followed by a public comment period, then the town manager report, which will, and then we'll have the select board's agenda schedule. A request from town manager to adjust the FY 2020 budget guidance will be done in conjunction with the FinCom meeting starting at 7:30, so that item will be skipped until 7:30. We'll discuss approving a memorandum of agreement with Indian Hill Music. We'll discuss the review and approve proposed capital definition policy. We'll make a determination, discuss determination to pursue green communities designation. We will review the draft of the select board goals. Under other business, we will consider setting a requested completion date for the fire department task force study committee. We will discuss creating a committee for the country club parcel, parentheses, plural possibly development. We will discuss select board process for assigning residents to membership on committees, and we will discuss ideas, reality/budget challenges for DPW sidewalk clearing in non-town center areas. And we have our ongoing issues list, followed by select board liaison reports and minutes of November 26, 2018 will be discussed and perhaps approved. Following the close of regular business, we will enter an executive session to conduct a strategy session in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel regarding the fire chief. We will not be returning to, excuse me, will we be returning?
No.
No, we will not be returning to normal session after the executive session. We will adjourn after executive session, so thank you. All right, any announcements from members of the board? Becky?
Yes, I'll just report that I attended and represented the board last night at the Interfaith Council's community tree lighting ceremony, and where I introduced this year's honorees who were chosen to light the tree, which was the National River Watershed Association and specifically the Wild and Scenic Rivers Study Committee, which you probably will remember came to us and then came to town meeting, and they went to, I believe, 8 or 9 other town meetings, and they ended up with a unanimous vote from all of the towns to seek federal designation of the National River as a wild and scenic river. And it was, I thought, particularly appropriate to honor them and to be reminded of that it is possible when we work together to solve very difficult problems. Certainly 50 years ago, no one would have thought it possible that the National River would be in such lovely state that we could consider designating it a wild and scenic river. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I may, I have some kind of sad news tonight to report to the board on a proclamation I'd like to read into the record. As you know, for the last 7 years, we've been very fortunate to have a K-9 unit within our police department. Officer Lola has been an outstanding member of the department, and she's had many lives saved, and she's helped with searches and things like that in surrounding communities. Unfortunately, her health is not there anymore, and tomorrow we're going to have to put her down. And I'm very sad to report that. But she's been a wonderful part of our department for 7 years. They're going to have a little ceremony. The police department's going to have a ceremony tomorrow for her. But I would like to read a proclamation into the record, if
Please.
I may.
Thank you.
Whereas K-9 Lola joined the Groton Police Department in April 2012, and whereas K-9 Lola and Officer Nick Belts completed the requisite training from Plymouth County Sheriff Department K-9 Academy for search and rescue tracking and basic narcotics detection to become Groton's first K-9 unit. And whereas K-9 Lola has performed admirably with numerous saves and finds throughout her career, both local and throughout the Commonwealth, including the Boston Marathon bombing. And whereas K-9 Lola has faithfully served the Groton Police Department, has been an ambassador for the town of Groton until the end of her watch this day, which would be tomorrow. Therefore, be it considered that we, Barry Pease, Allison Manugian, John Geiger, Joshua Deegan, Rebecca Pine, the Select Board of the town of Groton, and Massachusetts do hereby proclaim December 4th, 2018 K-9 Lola Day. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Wow. sad day. Thank you. All right, any other announcements from the board? Would anybody from the public like to follow that up? I have one from Miss Ellen in the corner. Would someone please get the microphone for her? Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Ellen, Main Street. Do I have questions for the over 55? Should I wait for that time?
Questions for,
I'm sorry, I
I think
didn't
she's
quite.
talking about the housing, the country club
I
housing.
have questions about the housing. Should I wait for that time?
We will be discussing that later. If that's, if you don't mind waiting until then, that'd be great, thank you.
Should I also have a question about snow on the sidewalks. Should I wait for that too?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I'll be sure to call on you.
Okay. Okay, I cannot come when the snow comes, I cannot come. Is it a possibility for me to have you tell my questions on air and answer them on air rather than email?
So if you send an email to the select board, and you request to be asked and answered during the meeting, that can
Yes.
happen, absolutely.
Send it to me,
Okay.
Miss Ellen.
Yeah, yeah.
Send it to me and I'll make sure it gets to the board.
Okay, also usually I send it to Dawn.
That's probably a better way to do it, yeah.
Also the fact that I'm in a wheelchair now, and I really need, in the winter time, I really need somebody to take my wheelchair to the door. And it's been said that they cannot do that. I was wondering if there's some way I can have them put my wheelchair from the van to the door.
Is this a council on aging restriction?
I don't know, it's Mark's restriction.
I don't know what she's asking, I'm sorry.
So can we look into this? Can we click clarification and understand what's going on there? Because I don't know that any of us, I don't know that any member of this board is qualified to answer that question. But if we can get some clarification on that, we'll look into it and try to help you out.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You'll hear from me again.
And I'll be calling on you, yes, twice. I got it. All right? All right, anybody else, any other members of the public? All right, Mark, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to take a few things out of order, if it's okay with you. Obviously, it's 7:30, we'll come back to the budget guidance. There are a couple issues we need to discuss there. But the first thing I need the board to do with our assessor here this evening is actually sign the classification allocation that you voted a couple of weeks ago. We need your actual signatures. I'm gonna pass this down to you. Just sign right here on the bottom of the page. This is what actually gets filed, saying that the board voted to set a single tax rate.
So every member of the board needs to sign.
Yes, I would ask you all to sign
Thank
it,
you.
please. Jonathan, is there anything else you need besides that? Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to jump down to other business while Tom Delaney is here and talk about the ideas, reality, budget challenges for DPW sidewalk clearing in
Sure.
the non-town center area. If you jump ahead in your packets to page 10, you'll see a memorandum that I received this morning from Tom Delaney that outlines his concerns and costs with the issue. As you know, there's been a request from the school department to address sidewalk plowing in some of the subdivisions in town because they changed their bus routes and they changed where they pick the students up. So there was an issue that the school committee forwarded on to us, and Tom's opinion on that particular issue was, we don't have the manpower, the equipment to do more than the center of town in West Groton, and that's what we've been doing for, how many years, Tommy?
Oh, since I've been here.
Yeah, so 30 years. That said, we did want to put some information to you. I sent this out to you. Hopefully, you all had a chance to read it this afternoon. Tom is here to answer questions about that, so I'll turn it over to Tommy.
Thanks, Mark. So briefly, I could go over some of the highlights of the letter I wrote up. So sidewalks in the center of town, for all of you who are not aware, we do the center itself, we do the adjoining streets, Champney Street, Hollis Street up to the end of Champney Street, up to the Blossom Lane, and over to the middle school. We do down Old Air Road to where it ends currently, and we do Farmers Road down to Groton School. Then we go down Long Hill, we do the center of West Groton area, and then time and weather permitting, we go into Riverbend. So that right there, as you can see in my letter up there, on a perfect scenario, if it's 3 or 4 or 5 inches of snow and everything's working right, it takes about 3 to 5 hours just to do that. With a little tiny snow plow in the front, it pushes it off to one side. Once we get into a heavier wet snow with a snow blower, you're looking at 10 plus hours to do just this area, and that's if nothing breaks. So this is on top of, and this has to happen at the end of the storm. I mean, because every time we go down plowing the snow during a regular storm, we just fill the sidewalks back in. So none of this can take place till the end of the storm. So at a minimum, we always push just to get the center done, even if it's just Main Street if I have to give the guys a break. If we're lucky enough to get a little bit more than that done that first night, we do. So to start adding more on and not knowing what time constraints are, I mean, I don't, the time frame on almost tripling our amount of sidewalks we do, 30 plus hours of sidewalk plowing, we don't have the time or the equipment to do it. So it's, we can take care of the stuff we have. Like I said, it's 5, 8, 10 hours depending on whatever the type of snow is, whatever type of equipment the equipment running well. It's a hard subject to cross. We really don't have the time and the good equipment to take care of it.
How many men do you have dedicated to the
One.
sidewalk? You have just one person?
Yeah, those sidewalk tractors are their own little animal themselves. I mean, it's not like it's a nice pickup truck you can hop in. The thing's this wide. You got a little tiny steering wheel, and you got to go between mailboxes and telephone poles and stone walls and everything. And if you go too fast, you break stuff. If you go too slow, you can still break stuff. But only one person, and it's one dedicated person. Because we've learned over the years, if you throw more than one person in the machine, they don't last. They don't last at all. And these aren't cheap. These things are about 180,000 each, equipped, and they don't have the life expectancy of a dump truck. I mean, these things last about 10 years, and then they start having major problems because they're in the slush and the salt and the hard junk. We've sucked up newspapers, rocks from stone walls and snow blowers. I mean, they're not an easy thing to do. So if anybody thinks it's just like getting a little snow blower and walking, it's
How many
far
newspapers have you taken from Bud?
How many lawns does he take?
Yeah, Bud's had a few lawns eaten up by it. That's true.
Is it okay to ask the question?
Yeah, Becky, thank you.
So before we even consider, it seems to me, adding plowing in subdivisions that have not been plowed in the past,
Mhm.
and the sidewalks, I want to know, what's the plan for the new sidewalks in the center of town? Or the sort of center of town, the new sidewalks that have been constructed this year?
So most of those ones that are new ones, we're gonna take care of those. I mean, those are gonna be fairly easy, some of them, except where the mailboxes are in the
Well-
middle of the sidewalk.
Oh, so that is a question.
I'm gonna go around them,
Why?
because I told the guys, the engineer from Mass Highway, I said, why are you doing that? And I don't know. So I've been
Mailboxes?
after their phone rings a couple times, they're gonna move them, but
Mailboxes and utility poles
Mhm.
in some cases. I
Mhm.
mean, it seems ridiculous.
I agree.
And, okay,
And that wasn't our design, and that was something that was on the contractor to take care of. They didn't do that, and I'm just, like I said, I'm just gonna be going around them, because I can't,
Okay.
if I try to go around those mailboxes, my machine's gonna be off in the woods, because they're
but
very
you,
tippy.
it is your plan to plow the sidewalks that's going down to CVS and down to Mill
Down the
Run?
Mill Run, yes. Yeah, most of those I'll be able to get with a pickup truck. I'll be able to hop right up on the curb, the way they're designed, and just go down there and plow them off. So the little machine is hardly gonna be on them at all.
All right. So then the other question that kind of jumps out at me is, we are doing Riverbend subdivision
Sometimes,
sometimes.
yes. We didn't do it last one, because there wasn't any frost on the ground, and it would just make a terrible mess when
Uh-huh.
we're done. So we don't do it every storm.
And I guess I could take a guess as to why we do that one. Maybe that was the first subdivision that was built with sidewalks, I don't know.
No, it's just gets connected to some of the system we already do.
Uh-huh,
So it's connected to Long Hill. Once we started doing Long Hill, and we built that one, we started doing that one.
okay.
That's when we started doing it.
Well, I sense that we need to prioritize that it would be lovely if we could plow every sidewalk in town. But we require sidewalks in all the new subdivisions, I think, I mean, I think
I
I'm
think you're right.
correct about that. And obviously, that is a huge expense, and I think that, in my mind, it wouldn't be our highest priority to plow every sidewalk in some of those subdivisions that don't have a huge amount of traffic in them. I do think it's important that we plow in the center of town where kids do not have the option of riding a bus. They have to walk to school or their parents have to drive them. And pedestrians, I mean, it's not just school children, the adults use those sidewalks, so that's, I think we need to concentrate our resources on what needs to be done. And maybe at some point we get into setting some criteria about subdivisions, but at this point for this winter, I would think doing the additional sidewalks that have been created this year is plenty enough to add to what you've already been doing.
It's gonna be, those are just about almost 3/4 of a mile, those there. It's gonna take us a little bit extra to do them, but they're, like I said, a lot of those we can get with the pickup truck. I'm gonna be able to hop right up on the curb and push them off, so it's not gonna take a lot of time. That's when it's easy for me. When they're that close to the road, I can hop right up and push them right off with another vehicle.
Yeah, Allison, thank you.
So I share some of Becky's thinking. I guess I'm a little, part of my concern is that I think the bus routes have changed significantly this year, and that while we're all familiar with the idea that kids walk to school through the center of town, the reality is in a lot of these subdivisions, the kids are now expected to walk, down to a larger street. So, I'm concerned about potential liability to the town in terms of having a sidewalk that's only a safe sidewalk sometimes. I don't, to me, one of the more interesting points here, and Tom, in your memo was at the end where you said, oh, and by the way, some towns require that the landowners clear sidewalks in front of their property, which I would love to hear kind of more about, what are the pros and cons of that? How do we get there? Is that something to think about? And I do share some of Becky's questions about, if we're requiring sidewalks in subdivisions and new developments and things, but we're not able or willing to keep them clear, then, I'm not sure why it may not be the best plan to require this amenity that's only usable 2/3 of the year. So I don't know, Tom, whether you have more information about how towns have gotten to a point where homeowners are required to clear in front of their properties, or?
So there's other towns and cities that do that. That's what they do, and they just set a bylaw that says you're going to maintain the stuff in front of your property, and if they don't, there's like civil fines and penalties that will go along with it. I believe Westford has some type of that, but they don't plow any sidewalks whatsoever over in the town of Westford. But a lot of the cities, they're the places where you're going to have more of this happening.
Should we look at a potential bylaw for the spring?
I don't know. I mean, part of the answer to that, to me, Mark, I would ask you, or maybe town council, is there liability to the town in having sidewalks that aren't usable or safe?
Yeah, Josh.
I understand what you're doing now in terms of taking care of the sidewalks that are within the center business district of both downtown here and West Groton Center. And I think it makes sense because the schools are requiring the kids to walk to school within those areas, as well as for other pedestrian uses using the center of those two areas, getting around safely. You're going down a very expensive road if you want to consider doing sidewalks in all the other subdivisions. I got my foot in the door as a landscape contractor in Cambridge, Belmont, Boston, with 9 snow blowers taking care of the sidewalks that were required by the towns to be done by the owners of the property. And I think that it would make sense to maintain the district that you're currently doing for the walking route. But now you have these areas that are in question where you have children who are walking in areas where the school bus used to go that it no longer goes anymore. And the question is, how busy are those roads, how dangerous is it, and what is the liability, to Allison's point? And I think we need to hit on that. But maybe creating a sidewalk plowing district that you are responsible for, and then a homeowner sidewalk responsibility district with clearing within 24 hours of a snowstorm and/or civil penalties can occur, would make sense. So I think looking at a hybrid, because Boston's no Cambridge, or Groton is no Cambridge or Belmont, but certainly there is a responsibility to deal with it, and maybe looking at some other rural communities in terms of how they enforce it, so we can get something in place. Here we are in December talking about this now with new buses, routes in place, so we need to solve this problem.
So give me the opportunity, I'll find out from town council Allison's question, and then Don and I and Tommy can look into other communities, find out how they do, and come back with a
Yeah,
proposal to
like
the board.
Westford, if they don't
Yeah.
plow any sidewalks.
Hey, Donna, we did a bunch of years ago, we did a sidewalk, we had a sidewalk committee that identified the ones we were gonna take care of and then the priorities for areas of expansions and repairs and stuff like that. But we set the ones that we're taking care of now and the reasons why. Let me see if I can dig that report up, because that's floating around somewhere that we ended up doing. You guys probably, Mike, you probably actually have that
All right,
in your
we'll
file
look, we'll look.
someplace.
John Geiger?
The town of Lexington does not plow all the sidewalks in the town of Lexington. They plow some of them. They remove snow from, I won't use the word plow, they remove snow from some of them. And they're very clear about what those roads are and where they are. And then they make it the responsibility of the property owner who abuts sidewalks to clear them. They do not impose a penalty if you don't do it, so, but they encourage it. But that's, if they're to be cleared and they're not on the list of the ones that the town does, they're the responsibility of property owners. And I think that's an understanding that we need to get clear with everybody here in Groton.
You know, that works well when you have lots with 50 or 75 or 100-foot frontage, but we have 225-foot frontage in
Right.
subdivisions, and that's a lot of sidewalk. So you might have to make a path, say 24-inch wide minimum, something like that,
Yeah.
as opposed to the whole width of the sidewalk, you know?
I'll let
Yeah,
the
they
board go.
vary in size too. You know, some of them are asphalt and they're not terribly wide, and that's also another problem with the equipment, because if you go down to Groton Woods, the sidewalks there are quite narrow.
I know, and our blades are 4 feet, so.
And so the blade's wider than the walk.
That's why we don't
Now, that's
go into
gonna
a
make a
riverbed unless
mess.
there's frost on the ground.
So there are a lot more, issues associated with this than merely crank up a plow and go.
There
And
is.
my prediction right now would be, if you're gonna set decisions on whether you're gonna have school or not on any given day, and you're gonna base it on whether the sidewalks have been cleared or not, you better be prepared to be holding classes in July. It's just that simple.
You're right, and when it comes to the ones in the center, if I know they're not gonna be done, I communicate that with Steve Byrne, who's
Yep.
the school maintenance guy, and I'll communicate with them, I'll say, Steve, roads will be fine, but the sidewalks will not be done in the center, or I'll tell them just the center itself's gonna be done, and, we're very conscious of what we try to get done for the schools.
All right, so we'll go to Allison, and then Becky, and then Miss Ellen had a question, and then Marlena had her hand up, and then I'll speak after all those people. Becky, Allison, please, thank you.
So I'm just wondering, I don't know, Mark, whether you know or Marlena may know, when the bus company kind of redid the routes, did they take into account sidewalks and clearing and that kind of thing, or did they just assume all the sidewalks are cleared or none of them?
Marlena, do you mind responding to that question if you can?
Yes, first of all, consultant has answered. We had a program in which Michael Knight ran various different routes, worked with D-Bus, but yes, absolutely, they took into consideration what the sidewalks are. The consultant that was hired to look at our transportation system as to find additional efficiencies and to try and find an economical manner in which we can delay our high school start time because it's educational benefit for our students. They're actually definitely taking into consideration sidewalks. So weekend, that would be mainly 119. I just wanted to, I had my hand up at.
Let's wait, let's follow, I appreciate you answering the question,
Yeah.
we'll come back to you, Marlene, I promise.
Sure.
So I was just gonna say, I've lived in Groton long enough that I remember when trash pickup was a municipal service provided by the municipality, and now we moved to a different model. And I think that maybe it makes sense at this point to really put something in writing that says, we will, like John said, we will plow certain, and make some conscious decisions about that, and say that homeowners and subdivisions are, have to plow their own sidewalks, but I will wanna make sure that we understand the liability.
I'll get that answer.
All right, Ms. Allen, can someone please hand her the microphone again? Thank you. Gary?
How far down on 119 are you going with the new sidewalks?
We were
Mill
planning,
Run?
we were planning on running to Mill Run Plaza with the
Just
new,
Mill Run Plaza, not all the way
Yeah.
down,
we were planning on going to Mill Run.
but not all the way down, not all the way down to the condos.
We weren't planning on it at this time, we were just planning on Mill Run.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Marlena?
So I just wanted to clarify, I wanted to make sure everyone here knew that the school committee nor administration wants our town to plow every single subdivision. That was not the reason why I actually circled in the select board and FinCom and the town manager. It was to point out the fact that we did hire a consultant. They will absolutely take into consideration the new sidewalk that exists specifically because it's right by our main campus there. So chances are bus stops may, I'm not the consultant, could be eliminated, which means they will be walking there. And where it was a new sidewalk, I knew it was not on schedule to be plowed now. And I know that things that are added in expenses cost money. So I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that that was in the works. When a consultant's looking, he is definitely looking at sidewalks. I'm not saying you shouldn't plow every subdivision, that's, thank God, not my job. But I'm just saying that there was that situation that was unique where the particular parent lived on a street who complained that we were picking up a bus stop there. And I had said, well, who owns the sidewalk? Because in my neighborhood, it's the COA, and we pay money in the COA plows. So I looked where she was, looked similar to my neighborhood, and she told me, no, it was conservation land. I said, well, then you need to go talk to the town. I'm not the owner of that property. And that's where those conversations. But I had no interest or no request for us to be plowing every single sidewalk in the town of Groton. I just want to make sure that everyone knew that.
I'll acknowledge Bud. He had his hand up next.
Yeah, I think that two things. One is I think the legal thing is very important, but we are probably in the majority of towns that has many, many subdivisions. People walk in those sidewalks. I know Bill Rickett does not plow any subdivisions. Kids walk all the way from the end of the subdivision to the street. The main street is plowed, the sidewalks going to the schools. But subdivisions, you walk, and that's what they've been doing forever. So the question is, how many other towns are like this? Because I don't think we want to become the poster child for plowing sidewalks when, in fact, I agree children need to be protected, but that's not how the world does it today. And to have our people plow their sidewalks like Boston does in front of businesses, I think that's going to become a nightmare for not just Tom, but the police and everything else. I think we ought to be very careful when we look into this to make sure that we just don't jump into something just because, like Marlena said, that was not our intent, the school committee's intent. So I think we ought to be careful with this thing.
May I go, Tommy?
You can go.
All right. Defer. So this one, when it came forward, I got a little bit frustrated because I've had two children going to school since, well, now they're 16 and 13, so that's 10th grade and 8th grade. And we live on a road that doesn't have a bus stop, and there's no sidewalks. And my kids have to walk to the end of the road, down our driveway, or through other neighbors' yards in the snow, and get to where they can be picked up. So I think you're lucky you got a sidewalk, and that's great. But you know, I have to plow out my mail. I have to drive out my mailbox, and during storms, the Tommy's trucks plow right back in. And I can't fault them for that. They gotta do their job. I'd rather have the streets clear and people be able to get to work. If it's a problem, I get in my car and I put my kids in my car and we drive to the bus stop and we park there. And I see lots and lots and lots of parents doing that. So to me, this is an absolutely, and forgive me for saying so, this is an absolutely ridiculous issue to try to lay on the hands of the town because a few people want their kids to walk on a nicely shaved sidewalk to the bus stop. Kids are resilient. They will be safe. And if you don't feel they're safe, please walk with them or please drive them to school. I know that sounds like a really hard thing, but I'm a parent. I deal with this. You have to deal with this for 18 years of each child's life or longer, 25, 30, depending on the child. I think this is a responsibility you have to take on and not try to tell the town that we have to be responsible for this. And I will never, ever, as long as I'm here, allow that to happen and have the town cost more money because someone lives in a subdivision and wants their sidewalk plowed. So, pardon me, but I feel very strongly about this item. Tommy, yes, please go.
No, I'm all set.
Does that mean, do you still want me to look in, does the board want
I
to look
think-
at the liability issue and what other towns do?
Yes.
I think we should look into it, and I think that if people want to make this happen and they want a bylaw, they can vote out in a town to make it individuals' responsibility. That's gonna be up to the town, not up to a select board member.
We already have a policy that specifically describes how the town takes care of snow and snow removal. So with the policy, we may need to tune that a little bit, but there's a starter already there. Turning it into a bylaw, I don't know, if every time you get a new stream right down here in the town or something, in the center where we already plow, you have to go back to the town meeting to get that added. I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense to me if we can work the policy route and make people aware of the policy.
Yeah, at the very least, as you say, make them aware that the town does not plow subdivision sidewalks with these 3 exceptions or whatever the case.
We can add that, we have our snow plowing policy, we can add that to there. One thing I did wanna bring up, so we asked one of the reasons why we picked up Riverbend, and I kinda blanked on it for the moment, but that turned into a commuter cut through, and that's one of the main reasons. Get a lot of New Hampshire cars that come up Mill Street, and then they come down through Riverbend to get down to Long Hill. That's one of the reasons why we started doing that sidewalks. It turned into a commuter route.
Okay. All right.
I would like to jump to the 7:30 items.
Yes, thank you.
Good. Gary, you want to
Thank you.
come up to the table? You want to sit right there? So, Mr. Chairman, I asked for time on the agenda tonight to the board. As you know, the finance team and I are in the process of developing the fiscal year 20 town manager's proposed operating budget, and you guys have given us guidance that said that the proposed budget cannot increase 2.54% over the fiscal year 19 budget. So in order to avoid confusion and eliminate potential accusations down the road of me not adhering to the guidance, which seems to crop up every year, I've decided to be proactive this year and come back to you and get clarification before I finalize the budget with my finance team. So there are 3 expenses in the FY20 budget, 2 which may not reoccur in 21, and 1 that the board directed me to include in the line item budget after the guidance was provided. So February 2020 is a leap year, and that'll add an extra day's pay to our hourly employees, which will come out to an additional $8,020. I don't think that will reoccur in FY21. The second issue is the performance incentives for our department heads, and the board, at the direction of the select board and finance committee, one of the things you wanted to see changed in performance incentive is how they're paid. And right now, we successfully negotiated with the supervisors union that it's going to be a one-time cash payment that will not add to the FY21 starting base pay. And the finance committee and select board had said we should take that out of free cash. Since it's a non-reoccurring, it doesn't start in the base for the following year. The third issue is the town's FY20 contribution to the OPEB trust fund. Now, in previous years, what we did was would have a separate article on the floor of town meeting. In town meeting in fiscal years 18 and 19, appropriated an additional $100,000 out of free cash. Allison asks that this be included in the operating budget. So in FY19, we appropriated $100,000 of free cash in a separate article for that purpose. And our actuary told us that we should increase it to at least a minimum of $169,000 in fiscal year 20 to keep the OPEB liability from growing. So that had never been in the budget before, and so now, the way I look at it, that's an additional $69,000 in the budget. So this will increase the budget, a total, these three items, of $102,143, all coming from free cash, or 0.67% of the FY19 budget. My feeling on this is that, you know, when you're dealing with a 2.54% guidance, that $102,000 is a pretty big chunk of change, and it does impact the overall guidance that the Finance Committee and Select Board gave me on the 2.54%. So what I'm asking for you tonight is clarification. Does that have to count towards the 2.54, or can I take that out separately from the 2.54, account for it differently, and then give you the 2.54 with those three issues eliminated? I hope that's clear. Does that make sense? Does it not make sense?
Yeah, Gary, are you in session?
We are in session.
Thank you. Bud, yeah.
Sit up here.
Mark.
Bud.
I'm speaking for myself, not the FinCom. I'm see what they agree or not agree, but on these items, the 69,000, I agree that that was not part of the 254 because it happened after the fact. So, and it does come free cash or any other way we can get it, but it says free cash per the free cash for our policy. So I think that's probably makes sense that that's in there.
But it's not included.
It's not included. You get to exclude that. And then the next year, of course, per the way we agreed to that last time, or with last time we spoke about OPEB as a group here, that in fact would get the regular increase, that whatever that is next year and the year after, that's how it'll stay. Groton is 169 plus, and that makes sense. The bonus, or merit. The way I recall this, because I'm the one who suggested this bonus, that was so that we would not add that to the ongoing expenses of the salary and wage line. It would be taken out of free cash, and it would be for whatever bonus you decided for that year. And I assume, this states that it's a one-time occurrence. I assume that that's not true, in the sense that...
Well, in the sense that it's not, when I start the fiscal 21 budget, if I'm still here, when we start the fiscal 21 budget, the base pay of those department heads is gonna be $25,000 less than what was appropriated at town meeting. That's why I refer to it as a one-time cost. Because if Mark Haddad's base salary is $100,000 and he gets a $5,000 bonus, when you figure out my 21 salary, it's gonna be on $100,000, not on $105,000. That was my only logic to that.
Okay, but the way the numbers would work is if it's $100,000 in payroll, $1 million in payroll, and $25,000 in bonus, and that's what they get this year. And then you say, well, the $25,000 does not count towards the 2.54. The following year, let's assume that you decide that they're all good employees, which they are, and you give them another $25,000 because there's enough cash in the free cash bucket, they will get $25,000. So the real payroll, not the ongoing, but the real payroll will be 125
Yep.
and 125. So if it doesn't get counted, it says that you're really paying $1 million plus 25,000, not the way this would say we're only spending $1 million because
Of tax revenue,
yeah, but
starting the base the following year, because the
no,
COLA is included in that.
I agree with that, but
Finish,
the reason we did this was so that we would not grow
Yep.
the payroll at a higher rate. So we said, let's separate the two. We're going to continue to pay the people. We're just going to cull out the bonus so that in fact we don't grow that piece. So that's going to be good for the town.
I'm looking for a clarification. You tell me what I have to do and I'm gonna do it. I'm just bringing these issues
I
to
think
you.
that should be
If that's
part
what you
of-
decide, then there will be.
I think it's part of the 254.
Okay.
Okay.
If that's what the board decides and the finance committee decides, I'm fine. I'm just asking, because I don't want to sit here on January 7th and say, well, wait a minute, you violated the 2.54.
I agree. I'm glad we're talking about it now.
year?
Leap year is, I'm sort of like in the, leap year is in fact a leap year. So every 4th year this is going to happen. So the way, if in fact it wasn't thought of when he did it, and it goes in, that says next year, when we exclude it from the bonus, I mean from the calculation. Next year we have to remember we take the starting base and we take that 6,000 out of it. So in fact, we let them have it this year. Next year we pull it out so that it's not in the base number, so it's not going to be there. So you just adjust the base, and it's easy to do.
All right, I'm just bringing the issues up.
And the OPEB number, I think we ought to keep separate, so that you get the big 3, and that's the subtotal. Let's roll it 254, and then the in-levy debt is separate.
Yep.
And OPEB is with that, and then you can look at that to say, okay, and then you get to the total budget, because
Yep.
that is really the total cost of the town.
Yep.
But it's separated out from the real ones that you control, i.e.
So if I understand what you're saying, the 2.54% guidance is salaries, wages, benefits.
And in this case, you threw 10,000 this year into,
So 35,000 of that, the big 3, will count towards the 2.54. The,
What are
the
you talking about?
incentive and the 33,000, the incentive and the leap year. But the 69,000 I can account for separately in my presentation of the 2.54%.
yeah, let me restate that so I make sure you
Yep.
and I agree to.
I want this to be, and the minutes will be
And
clear.
Gary's gonna have to agree to this as well.
Well, the finance
And the
committee has
finance
to agree.
committee. The 254, we are going to this year, and going forward, it won't matter on the 25,000, because it's gonna be in the base.
Okay,
If
understood.
you don't give it up the following year, you will go down.
Yep.
You can do what you want with that
Okay.
25,000, but it is in the 254 this year.
Okay.
You don't get that excluded.
Fine,
And the 6,000 or 8,000.
8,000 on leap year.
$8,000. It's up to what the team decides.
We're talking .001%,
So in that case,
it's not that big a deal.
that becomes part of, you
Yep.
gotta exclude that as well from your.
All right.
That is part of your 254.
Okay,
The only thing excluded is the 69 on top of the 100. Because the 100 was never in there anyways, that was always separate.
yeah, so Patricia and I had a long talk about this afternoon, trying to show apples to apples comparison. I have artificially inflated the FY19 budget by 100,000, even though it was a separate vote on an article, because if you want me to put it in the operating budget to show a comparison, well, we appropriate 100,000 in 19, even though it wasn't in the budget.
Yeah.
And then 169,000 in 20.
Yeah.
So that 69,000 is what I see
Correct.
as the gap.
I agree.
Okay.
So 2 out of 3 don't get excluded from the 254. The 69 does.
If that's what you guys vote tonight, I'm clear and I know what my marching orders
All
are.
right, well, we've heard the opinion of one member of the FinCom. Thank you. Gary, do any other members of the FinCom wish to weigh in and have an opinion on this?
Yeah, so I would just say first off, again, thank you, Mr. Town Manager, for bringing this forward. I love that you did that rather than just moving forward and causing controversy. So, secondly, I'd pretty much 100% in line with what Bud said. I think it makes sense to me on the OPEB thing to not count it against the 254. The other two I would. Any other Finance Committee members care to speak?
Art? Oh.
Sorry.
Sorry. I apologize.
The one beside our.
Well, he was across the microphone. I didn't know that. I apologize.
It's probably going to become known that I'm usually the one that dissents on things, so I'm going to dissent on this one too. I believe that the leap year should not count into the 2.54. I mean, that just came to light. I made note of it when I was doing my budget in Dunstable. You don't think of it until you start doing the calculation. And something that's going to recur once every 4 years shouldn't be put in a base that we're comparing year to year on. I know it's a small amount. I know it's not going to make a big difference, but I think the only thing there that should count are the merit increases, because even though they're coming out of free cash, they do recur every year. Varying amounts, but they do recur.
Thank you. Any other FinCom members? Okay, members of the Board of Selectmen, Josh, hit me first.
No, I think that you could account for the $8,000 increase by dividing the 8,000 by 4 and adding 2.5% per year and carrying it in your budget. Other than that, I mean, then it's in there. But then if you put it in there, you're gonna spend it potentially. So,
Well,
I
you'll see in the
understand-
budget, I
understand-
accounted for it separately, you'll see the exact impact of
But leap year has happened before.
Yes.
It will happen again.
every 4 years.
So, just something to bear in mind.
Yep. I
And,
get you.
I hadn't thought about what Bud said and the FinCom agreed with, and it makes sense to me, so.
Becky, yeah, and then we'll do John.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in agreement with what has been said. I can go either way on the leap year thing. I think what Bud was saying, if we put it in, if we include it this year, but we gotta remember to take it out next year.
Well, that's why I accounted for it separately, it definitely will come
Right.
out next year.
Right. The merit bonuses are gonna happen every year, and OPEB, we should do it, but I don't think it should count in the 254. So, I'm in agreement.
John Geiger?
I don't know, perhaps I pay too much attention to the term level funded. To me, that means last year's increased by a certain amount. And so when leap year comes, it really didn't happen last year. It never happens 2 years in a row. It never happens 3 years in a row. I see that as something that is new for that 1 year. And accordingly, I'm of the opinion that the 69,000 should come out of the the 2.54 as the $80,020 for the leap year wages.
8,000.
$8,020 for the leap, what did I say?
80,000, which is okay.
Oh, sorry. Little high. $8,020 is not in the 2.54, and that the merit increases stay in the 2.54, because they will be recur again next year. Some amount.
Allison, you're next.
I'm with Bud.
You're with Bud, okay. So it seems like we have two different proposals. There's agreement on one of them, which is what should stay in, what should stay out. And so I'm of two minds of voting on this. One, I would say, let's get the one that's easy done, right? What should stay in, what should stay out, which everybody seems to be in agreement. And then we can have a drag down about the leap year at $8,000.
I'm not, $8,000 is not a big deal, so I'll withdraw that request. I think I understand, so I'd ask the board to vote tonight. You're welcome. I would ask the board to vote tonight to vote specifically that the increase in the OPEB funding that's being added to the budget this year does not count towards the 2.54% budget.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded on the Board of Selectmen, Select Board, excuse me. Is there any further discussion? John, you have another discussion point?
Yes, I think the motion should identify, though, that the leap year wage funding will be removed before the 2020 budget,
2021 budget.
2021 budget
Oh.
is put into practice.
That has nothing to do with this year's guidance, so I wouldn't, it'll automatically.
Well,
come
no,
out
but
next
we
year.
don't want to forget about it.
No, you know why we won't forget about it? I separated it out on every salary line item. You will see the exact cost of the leap year in each department budget. There's no way it can be repeated, because you'll see it. I hope that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't.
Anybody like to consider John's,
okay.
John?
I mean, I just
agree.
think it would be good if it was on paper someplace, like in the motion.
I'm fine with that.
Then we know how
You're
we're gonna
fine with
handle
it as part of the
going
motion?
forward.
I'm fine with his addition to the motion.
I amend the motion that I move to include the removal of the leap year salary funding for the FY '21 budget.
Is there a second on the
Oh, I'll second.
friendly amendment?
Yeah, I'll
Alright.
second.
So we have a new motion on the floor, which includes simply excluding the extra for OPEB, and everything else will be considered as part of the budget guidance. And then in 2021, we will expect to see the base that we've used the improvement upon go down by $8,020.
Correct.
Is that
That's
clear to
correct.
everybody?
Yes.
All right, Gary, we'll just take a vote, and then you guys can do whatever, because I think we're pretty much on the same page. So, all right, all those in favor, aye, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstains? So I heard that unanimous. Mr. Chair,
I take a finance committee motion in support of
guidance clarification question that came up today.
Okay.
One of the things that you also voted, no new positions other than the firefighters, which is clear, but you said no additional hours to employees as well. My question is, there is one department that has asked for additional hours 2 years in a row, and that is the assessor's office that lost a 33-hour position last year, and there's a request for 5 additional hours. If I can get those 5 additional hours into the 2.54, am I allowed to do that? I'll stay within the 2.54, but it would be 5 hours to the assessor's clerk, going from 35 to 40. And before I put that in the budget, that is you had given me guidance, no additional hours. If I can make it work within the 2.54%, can I?
Did we give guidance, no additional hours?
Yes, you did.
I remember no additional people, I don't remember saying no additional.
I believe you said no additional, Patricia, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they said no additional hours.
That was the intent, it wasn't absolutely.
Yeah. So I just want to clarify, because if I can keep that in the 2.54, I'd like to do it.
That's
I'll be
5
honest.
hours a week.
5 hours a week. It's not gonna cost any more benefits because it's already a benefited position. It'll just be an additional, I think, $6,000 or $7,000? $7,000.
Was this the position that we ended up splitting,
You eliminated that position from the budget.
we completely eliminated
Gone.
a full-time?
Yep, 33-hour benefited position last year. 2 years ago.
Oh,
2
I
years
wasn't
ago.
here 2 years ago.
That's why you don't remember.
Yeah, I realize why you're blanking on it, yes. Is there any questions on that from, Gary, go, yeah, Dan, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, to me, if it stays within the budget guidance, and B, clearly, as always, that it's clearly justified, during the annual meeting as to why this needs to be done, and how much more money we're gonna make as a result.
Assessors as a profit center, that's great. Any other, board members weigh on that? I see no other discussion here. So that being said, the town manager is asking for guidance and clarification on that, so I do recommend we take a vote. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
John Bagger, please, thank you.
I move that we authorize the town manager to increase the wages in the assessor's office by 5 hours per week.
As long as it stays
As
within the 2.54.
long as it stays in the 2.54% increase guidance.
Second.
Moved and seconded, Josh Deacon,
Can I ask Jonathan a question?
please. Mr. Jonathan, would you care to respond to a question from the board?
So, my understanding of this, I guess, this is the first I've heard of this, is this isn't for you, this is for your clerk, correct?
Correct. Mike, we don't have a clerk anymore, so we have an assessor and assistant assessor.
So, give us your rationale as to why you need this, please.
Okay, when I was not the principal assessor when this came down, I think it actually was, Miss Ellen was reminding me, because Becky's been gone more than 2 years, so I think it was 3 years ago. So when Becky retired, the budget that year, we needed, Rena said that we could potentially get away with not having a clerk for a while, as long as down the road, we made the assistant assessor 40 hours. So we lost 33, we're asking for 5 back later on down the road when we could afford it. So not having a clerk in full-time, I'm fine with, but it does present problems. Some of the problems are that, we're like retail in the assessor's office. We have to be there. The office has to be open and someone has to be there. So the assistant assessor is the one that does the majority of the field work, but now she also has the clerk's duties of maintaining deeds, abutters lists, a ton of stuff that the clerk did. So it gets a little bit hairy time-wise for her, and I chip in where I can, but now my responsibilities are much different than when I first started working here. So the 5 hours will go a long way. I don't think we ever need 3 people. I think we're good at 2. I just want 2 at 40 hours, not 2 at 75. 2 at 80 hours, not 2 at 75, because we have a 40 and a 35. would just like to increase her to 40 hours so that we match up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything further from members of the board? Questions? Anything further from the public on this? All right, all those in favor of the motion that John has presented, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstained? All right, I heard that unanimous. FinCom?
I take a motion in support of the advice of the select board. So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. I heard it unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you, board, thank you, Finance Committee. Avoid a lot of confusion on January 7th, which I think is excellent.
Before we move away, is there a date for the Saturday all boards meeting?
Usually it's the last Saturday or first Saturday in February. You guys haven't even talked about that yet, right?
We usually set that date after the meeting where you present the budget to us, which occurs in the beginning of January.
January 7th.
Okay, I guess I would hope that we would set it on January 7th so we know. Thank you.
Thank you, Finance Committee. Appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to jump down to another item under other business, and that is to consider setting a requested completion date for the Fire Department Task Force while they're here. I hope they're still here, or maybe they're not here.
Makes sense.
I guess they're not here. Oh, do I have the sign thing for Jonathan?
Oh,
It's down the far end.
It's down this end.
Thanks, Jonathan.
John's here.
You don't need that, do you?
So, Mr. Chairman, this item was put on the agenda by Select Board Member Deegan
Yes.
last week, but I have an issue that came up tonight during the meeting that has me very, very concerned, that I really need the Board of Selectmen to address tonight. The fire chief is, I don't know how to describe it, but the fire chief is frustrated, and the fire chief is on the verge of, I don't want to say walking out, but he's not happy right now, based on the length of time that this task force has gone on, based on some of the issues that have come up during the meetings. I've had to talk him off the ledge tonight, and I don't think I was successful doing that. We really need this to come to a conclusion, and the one thing that he has said to me 1,000 times is, when has any other department had to have a task force to study whether or not a need in that department was addressed? You just addressed the assessor's office tonight as an example without going through a task force to decide whether or not you want to add 5 hours. The fire chief is extremely frustrated. I share his frustration, and I think the board really needs to take action tonight to decide how much longer this is going to go on. It's been going on since August. We've already added 2 firefighters to the department. We're talking about an additional $53,000 to the budget if we go forward with 2 additional firefighters, because the $73,000 in the budget goes away, which is the on-calls thing. And I think a decision needs to be made, and it seems that we're caught up in a lot of statistics and minutia that's really bogging this thing down. Now, I know they have a public forum scheduled for next Tuesday night at the fire station, which I think is great progress, but we really need to bring this to a head, and that's what I wanted to say to the board tonight. John, I don't know if Steele talked to you tonight on his way out or not, but I know he's extremely frustrated with this whole process.
He is, and he did chat with me.
Is it reasonable to share the, so I question, is it attending the meetings? Is it that he doesn't know how to proceed until they're done? Is it that he's being requested to provide far beyond and is compromising his ability to serve the town properly during what we consider a reasonable plus workday? How can somebody help me characterize that situation?
Well, I don't know what's going on inside the committee, but this has strung out excessively. It would seem. And I don't know, from just a little bit I heard at the end tonight, whether we're any closer to having a recommendation one way or another that's supported by a majority of the committee to come to the Board of Selectmen in preparation for budgets and town meetings and so forth. And I think the perpetuation of the process, when we're talking about the staffing levels and so forth, is just very frustrating for him. And he's not He's not someone that gets frustrated early, at least not my experience with him.
Yeah, since we're gonna be discussing your board and you're the chair, would you be kind enough to join us?
I really wasn't planning to do this, but.
No, oh yeah, so you're not even the chair. You're just a member happily representing your team, yes?
I understand.
We appreciate that.
And I guess I would try to briefly say, I agree that it's been a long haul, and it's been frustrating at certain times, but there's been a great deal of data acquisition, which personally, I felt we had enough numbers a while ago, but that's the way it went. But the point is, I think we're very close. So if you're looking for a drop dead date, I don't think it has to be that far out. We're gonna try to meet with the community next week, and I would say that we should have a recommendation in January, no later than February. Now, granted, it's gone a long time, but this is the first, frankly, I don't know if you've talked to anybody else in the committee, this is the first that I've heard that the chief is exasperated.
It was, I think something boiled over with him tonight, because he's been willing, he's attended all the meetings, he's provided all the information when requested to provide information. I don't think he's missed a meeting, has he? I think the only time he missed a meeting was when he was on vacation. They didn't meet that particular week. So he's been an active participant in this. I think tonight
Absolutely.
went over the boiling point for him, for whatever reason.
Josh, Deegan.
Yeah, I did ask for this to be added to our agenda, and I think that this is a very important committee, and you are studying something that is going to impact and potentially change the dynamic of how our fire department moves into the future, above and beyond the 2 firefighters that we are adding to the current budget. And I have heard some of your meetings that I've caught at the tail end as I've come in for our meetings, and I've talked to the chief about it. And I think that I can't speak for him, and he hasn't said this to me, but I'm just getting a feeling that it's paralysis by analysis here, and that you had mentioned that there is a tremendous amount of data that has been derived, and some of the members of your committee are data junkies, and I think that's great. But by the same token, we need to bring this to conclusion in so much as if the recommendations could potentially impact the FY20 budget in a fashion that Mark is not currently accounting for in his budget, that the sooner that that's known, the better, coming into town meeting. So with the holidays coming up, I had recommended that this be concluded by the first of the year. And that I understand that the holidays are kicking, and I did speak to one of your committee members this evening, and they thought certainly that mid to late January was great. So I'd like to propose a drop dead date on this thing for you to come up with a recommendation no later than the end of January, not to be extended. Do you think that's a fair statement?
That's why I put it on the table.
So, I've said my piece.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Allison.
So I guess for me, I echo what Josh said, that this is a really important kind of long-term planning analysis and decision to be made. That said, I think it's understandable that the fire chief is frustrated with the current situation in that he and his workers are spread incredibly thin, and I think that there's, they're not highly confident at every moment of the day that they have what they need to do their job effectively, and that's not a comfortable position ever to be in. So I was thinking actually, Josh, of the end of this year still as the kind of date for the committee to come and report to us, and I personally am fine with, if it's a split decision. I don't even remember how many people are on the committee, but if
5 members.
So if it's a 3-2 decision, I'm fine with that coming forward to us. We kind of, here are the top 2 choices, and here's why, and we're kind of deadlocked. And
Well, I think one thing we would like to get, and we're optimistic that we're going to attract some folks next week, and we're going to get some feedback from attendees. And that's where we'll be talking a little bit, there'll be a lot of numbers, but what we're thinking about with the fire department going forward. So I just think it would be very difficult for us to have a final recommendation over the holidays. I'd like to just push back a couple of weeks if we could.
Becky and then John.
So, I just want to clarify, Josh, you were suggesting the end of January?
Well, I did say that, but I'm open to mid-January as well.
Well, I guess I have a number of reactions here. I understand that the chief may be frustrated and feel like this is taking way too long. I have lived through a lot of really important decisions in this town that have taken way too long, especially from the vantage point of the people who are really closely associated and working with them. I mean, I just think of the years it took for us to settle on building a new high school, the years it took to settle on building a new fire station. I don't think this is, you know, I could perhaps relieve him of a sense that we're singling this department out. I don't think that that is true. I think that this is an extremely important decision for the town to make. I personally want it to be based on data rather than opinions or wishes or emotional arguments about that can always be made in any kind of public safety discussion that, you know, it will be more safe if we do such and such. That is always true, but let's get the data that helps us make the decision that is best for the town as a whole. I mean, obviously, we're not going to provide a resident firefighter at the end of everyone's driveway with a hydrant right next to it and a fully equipped, you know, piece of equipment. We have to make a decision that works for the whole town. So these things always take longer than one wants them to. I personally have a little bit of frustration with our own process that we heard in the middle of the summer of 2017, a report on the fire department that never mentioned hiring full-time people. And when that consultant's final report arrived, it was not brought to our attention, it was just shared, here it is. There was no indication that there were new recommendations in there for full-time people. And I think if we had been apprised of that, if we had known that, you know, what you heard 3, 4, 5 months ago is outdated and we now think that we need to hire full-time people, we would have gotten started on this process earlier ourselves. So I'm sorry it's taking a long time, but I don't want to shortchange a committee that we set up to provide us the data and some recommendations. I think if they can be done by the end of January, that is fine.
If I can add a couple of things, Mr. Chairman? If I may, the chairman of the Fire Department Task Force Committee said December 31st is fine with him to getting a report to the board. That's the first thing for your consideration. The second thing is I completely disagree with you, Becky, on the report back in January, back in the summer of 2017. That report came in and they talked about adding additional staff and additional call firefighters and how to go about doing that, and Steele started on a recruitment process right away. So my memory is a little bit different than yours. I believe it has called for those additional staff, and that's one of the main reasons in the winter of 2017, spring of 2018, when I presented the budget, I asked for 4 additional firefighters. It was based a lot on that report.
But that
came out.
report, when it was presented to us in July, made no mention of full-time people. It only focused on.
The final report was in November or December of that.
The final report arrived in December and
Yep.
was not highlighted, was not brought to our attention. No one came and spoke to us and said, by the way, the recommendations have changed.
Okay, so let's put a task on the agenda to review the report, and we'll settle this. What does the report actually have? Whether or not one learned of it when may be immaterial, but we understand the frustrations when information gets changed or challenged or not received right. Jonathan? John? Sorry.
Whoa, are we getting formal here?
Yes, you can tell. Apologize.
Number one, I wasn't here for those reports coming in, and for me, they're history. And if they weren't handled right, we can learn from it, but we can't change it. So I want to deal with today. And I also suspect that when you look at data, sometimes it can be very, very precise. I can measure something and I can tell you exactly how long it is, down to a 64th of an inch or even more. But other problems, when you look at them, you wind up with a handful of variables, or two handfuls of variables. And sometimes it's the case that you can't get exact data on every one of the variables. So you wind up having to have the people that are looking at it agree on some assumptions of how the variable components will be worked. And those kind of discussions can go on for a very long time and may never reach common agreement. And I suspect, but I don't know, that we may be bumping into at least a bit of that in all the data that we're massaging and trying to draw conclusions from, cause and effect relationships. And so I think the committee has to perhaps recognize that, you know, we're not gonna be able to say 2 plus, I don't wanna use twos, 3 plus 3 equals 6 in BOM. It's not 6.1, it's not 5.9, it's 6. I don't think we're gonna be able to do that mathematically in this process. That's my sense. So what I'd like to see happen is that the committee conduct their public input session, which I think is very worthwhile, and I support whoever said we need to get more information out about it, because I'm not, I saw it in the editorial section of the Herald last week, but that's the only place I've seen it.
It's on the homepage of our website, it's been on Facebook, we've tweeted it out, we've done a lot. We even talked about getting a banner, but we couldn't do a banner in time, but I'll try to get more word out this
But we
week.
need to get more word out in any medium
next week.
that we can. And I'd like to see the committee make a decision and submit its recommendation to the Board of Selectmen and deliver that document to the town manager by the close of business on on January 18th. So that's middle of January. Because we're
I would just
tracking
like
down
to-
on this budget line, and
I was just gonna comment that if you're familiar with Parkinson's Law, which is a industrial measuring stick, it says that a conclusion the work will take the time allotted for it. And I think unfortunately the committee was told that it was a 1-year charter as a committee. And I say that on a personal note because I felt like we kept wrestling with items internally rather than feeling the pressure of having to come to a decision. It was a one-year term.
I don't remember either.
Well, I'm pretty sure it was a
Well,
one-year
you
term.
appoint committees till June 30th.
But whether that's true and it's not offered as an excuse, we have been guilty of getting too much data and bending it and seeking more and seeking more and seeking more. I think we have an adequate status where we are now, coupled with the community outreach next week. I think that's a reasonable date. Unfortunately, you spoke to Peter, who was our chairman.
Or he just sent me a text.
I didn't. Huh?
He sent me a text.
Okay.
Can I add one more thing on top of everything following up? Some of Steele's frustration is that, go back and look at those last 3 budget proposals. He's asked for more firefighters in each one of those proposals. And I think his frustration in all this process is it seems that this committee, and I think his viewpoint is undermining his ability to run his department, because now he's answering to a committee and not his bosses, which is the select board. So I think that's where his frustration is coming in right now, the fact that he's been asking for additional firefighters for 3 years.
I'll say that the board that we've appointed is representative of us, and we've asked them to be our eyes and ears and study this on our behalf. So if anybody's feeling that way, please recognize that this is a board with a full vested authority of the select board, and therefore, is effectively us, and we appreciate the volunteer work that's happening, and a lot of it to get that done. I do think it's reasonable as the committee as the board who is choosing that committee and requesting to do the work, that we do set a deadline. I do think that's a valid idea. I think that originally we set a reasonable deadline, and that got some appropriately so, that was called out, appropriately so. But given that I've heard a couple things from a couple committee members, they feel that they are ready to make a decision and present something within a reasonable time frame, that it would be actually a wise idea to codify that and request that they do so, and it appears to be not causing a hardship on the committee itself, especially if the chair feels it's 31st, and there's been 2 proposals on the table I've heard, which is the 18th of January and the 31st of January. It's both those beyond what the chair has requested, right? So to me, those are both reasonable assessments and assumptions from where the committee sits as they do the good work of the board on our behalf, and much appreciation from this board. John, does any member of the board have anything further on this item they'd like to discuss? All right, with that, and thank you very much for your opinion. Appreciate it very much.
And all the work
Glad it was
you're doing.
here.
Work you've done. Is there any member of the public that'd like to comment on this? Please take the microphone.
I think that I heard a figure of $53,000 of incremental cost here, and that's not a figure that the committee actually started with. I think they started with 4 full-time, maybe even 5 full-time firefighters, but the last town meeting sort of whittled away a couple of firefighters from that. But this is a big ask, as Josh puts it. It's an important next step, and this board has submitted, not you individuals, but this board has submitted to town meeting requests big asks in the past that turned out to be not very well vetted. The board asked the town to purchase Sacred Heart Church, and it later turned out, when the analysis was done, that would have been a tremendous mistake. Sacred Heart Church would not have served as a good site for the fire station. This board has asked the town to purchase a $12 million sewer system. It turned out, when you really looked at it, we don't need a sewer system at Lost Lake. It would have been unnecessary. And so the board may well be asking the town to incur a couple $100,000 a year of additional costs for full-time firefighters. Your charge to this committee is that they provide, as quantitatively possible, the added benefits that will accrue to the citizens of Groton. The quantitative benefits are going to be achieved through data. When I sat and listened to the board today, or the committee today, it sounds like they're starting to hone in on that data. It sounds like they're starting to say that if we add these hours, we will cover this many more calls, and we will cover this many more calls at this much of an increased response time. And it sounds like they're getting to the point where they can provide the community with some sense of the benefit that will accrue if they shell out, if the community shells out their more money. I suggest that it would be worthwhile waiting for that to happen rather than rushing it. Because if you rush it, you'll have people stand up at town meetings saying, you have not given me anything. You haven't told me what I'm getting for my additional tax dollars. And this is knowable. It's not easy, but this is knowable. The data is there to figure it out.
John Geiger.
I don't think you were here last week, so you missed my sermon on this term, full-time firefighter. We're not talking about manning the station every 24/7 with all paid professional. We will always be a mix of professional firefighters and semi-professional firefighters, which are these on-call people that we depend on. We will always depend on them, I suspect, in this town. So when we say 7 by 24, I'll look at you and tell you, you got that now. Between the full-time firefighters and the part-time firefighters, you've got 7 by 24. The difference being that the response during the daytime can be quicker than the response during the night. So what we're really talking about is the balance between how many are on duty and in the station at any hour of the day versus so you've got an equation there that says at noontime, 40% of the coverage is coming from online, professional people, and the other 60% is coming from call. And all we're doing is changing these sort of percentage ratios to get the best balance we can find between cost, response time, and all the other variables that are in there. So I want us to be really careful when we say full-time, 7x24 fire department, and be more accurate in identifying what it is we're tinkering with, which is really how much coverage of full-time people are in that station at any hour in the 24-hour cycle. Is that?
That was one of the first things we all learned in the committee. All right, that the term 724 does not necessarily mean that there is somebody in the fire station. All right.
People need to understand.
But I guess there's some question as to when the town voted on it, whether or not that understanding was clear to the average citizen. I don't know. But
I've been worried about that use of that term from the first time I heard it in the context of what we're doing here.
That was the original proposal, was 24-hour coverage, people in the fire department, in the fire station. It's right here, that.
I don't know what that is, but
Okay,
And that, I believe, is also what our fire chief listed in his goals. I didn't bring my copy of that.
Allison?
So I'm just looking at the calendar for January, and we have meetings, I believe, on the 14th and then the 28th. I'm wondering if we can request that this committee come to us on the 14th with a kind of draft final presentation with a report, a final report to follow. And we can put a date on that. I mean, we need to move along, not only in terms of the committee, but in terms of this meeting.
Right, yes.
I mean-
So I've heard two things on the board. I'm looking for a motion from somebody, some member of the board to give me one of the
I
two.
like Allison's idea. Let's, can I
Yeah,
make that
so
motion?
I'll-
Or
Yeah,
go-
I'll make a
go-
motion that we invite the Fire Station Task Force Review Committee group to our meeting on the 14th to present their final recommendations verbally with a,
I did like your use of the term draft.
okay, with a draft final verbal presentation with a written report to follow by February 1st.
no,
Sounds fine to me. I'll second that.
Okay, under discussion, John.
we come with a draft. Now we're going to mess with the draft for a month and a half. I just don't,
No,
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks, Madam Proposal.
so we get a draft, and now what's gonna happen? Is there gonna be more input from anybody? Are there gonna be any more, what does the draft produce for us, except a document that isn't final? We still don't know where we're going.
So to me, what I would like to see would be a verbal, you know, it could turn out to be the final result and presentation, basically, or it may be that in discussion with the select board that night, there are a few questions, concerns, tweaks that are made, and then the final report comes to us in writing, 2 weeks later.
Well, is the so?
John, that's what I meant when I endorsed the idea of a draft. We're gonna present our recommendation, our findings, our recommendations, and whatever the number are. And I was just counting on getting your feedback, and then we would finalize our report.
And then,
So is the intent that the select board will provide feedback that will change the recommendation of the committee that we appointed to come back to us with an answer?
that's not, well, gosh, I sure hope not. And
No.
I would-
Well, I'm trying to understand what
I
the
think
value
that
of the
there may
draft
be-
is.
There may be things that we would like clarified in the report, if they're not clear, or we feel that they would be better presented at town meeting in a certain way, and maybe simply a question about an item in the report that could be fleshed out. Those are the kinds of questions I usually see in this type of dialogue, but effectively, it's my hope that it would be our request, effectively, that the board will have voted on their recommendation to be delivered. Just that the final report, the documentation of that delivery will not be finalized yet.
I wouldn't expect that we would presented without having
Right, so,
voted on
so
it.
therefore they would already have voted. I mean, I mean, unless they wanna reconsider their own vote, which I don't think we would
Encourage.
would encourage or
Mr.
allow.
Chairman?
Yeah,
As far as dates go, why don't you say the meeting of the 14th to give the preliminary report and a final recommendation no later than the time the finance committee meets on that Saturday with you, because that's when they're gonna go into the budget. If there's budget implications, the finance committee needs to have all the data by that date.
yeah, I guess I think it's really important that the board doesn't vote on anything until we have a finalized report, so that we know in clarity what we're doing, just so that this board doesn't vote, so that we don't take any action until we have a document to back it up. But that's okay. Josh?
Yeah, I like what Allison said and what John said. Come in with a draft, executive summary based on a vote and have the final report here by January 31st. Because if you listen to what the town manager said and you deliver that report on the day that the finance committee meets jointly with the selectmen, it gives no time for reaction.
Agreed.
To get that a week before, at least everybody's braced for, oh wow, Mark's budget was this, and now this, if we're gonna include it, is gonna throw a monkey wrench at it. And I don't mean that in a negative way, based on the recommendation, but you gotta give some time to make considerations as to what you would alter in a budget in order to make the accommodations or add to
All
that
right.
budget.
All right, let's take a vote. All those in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
What was the date on the final, February 1st, did you say?
14th.
Well,
They'll come
we
to our
haven't
meeting on the 14th.
Yeah, what about the final report, please?
I had it prior to February 1st.
She had
So
it.
make it
Aye.
the 28th, your next
Aye,
week.
Aye.
thank you.
So we have 14th and the 28th, okay?
So the 14th,
And the
January.
Yeah, 14th for the presentation,
Preliminary.
the 28th for the final report to be delivered to the town hall.
thank you.
Thank you so
And
much.
that'll give you guys a meeting on that Monday, the 28th, to vote and approve that you turn it into town hall.
which then, I believe, says that our Saturday morning meeting has to be February 2nd.
9th.
Or the
That's what the finance committee picks.
Or
for the
second
date.
or
They
ninth,
haven't said it
something.
yet.
Let's
Yeah,
not
let's
dictate the
not-
finance committee's meeting
let's
schedule.
let's be kind to the finance
Right.
committee here.
I do think it would be helpful though if they could be encouraged to set that meeting date sooner than later.
Yeah.
You have
I think the
school
2 dates-
vacation coming up for some people.
That'll be.
Yeah.
very
Okay,
good.
moving on, next
Mr.
item.
Chairman, as you
agenda.
know, at the
Let's,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Town Manager, let's do the item in deference to Ms. Ellen, who may have to leave soon. Can we do the item regarding discuss committee for country club parcel development, please?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask the board to hold off on creating that committee until such time as I have the opportunity to sit down with our engineer to map out what he's going to do. He's gonna get to me, at the end of next week. He has prior commitments. So once I understand exactly what he's going to do, I wanna come back to the board with a formal, charge and, proposal for that committee. So at this time, I'm gonna ask the board to hold off on doing anything
All right,
at this time.
Ms. Ellen, would you please, do you have some questions regarding that? Let me get you the microphone. No, thanks. Fine.
I'd like to work with you on that.
Okay, absolutely. It's in my-
Yes. Make sure you do the sidewalks on both sides of the streets, because it's, over 50 people have to do a lot of walking.
You're talking on, if we're gonna consider the country club parcel, please put sidewalks on both sides of the street during that design process.
And make sure the streets are wide enough, because over 55 have a tendency to need more room to drive.
Okay, all right. Excellent feedback, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. All right, so, without further, refusal from the board, we'll move on to the next item.
Mr. Chairman, as you know, Ed Takashi and Town Council and I have been working with representatives from Indian Hill to settle the issue of the sheet metal permit. As part of the discussions, Indian Hill has agreed to pay the permit fee, about $70,000. In addition, they've asked that we outline all the remaining permit fees that we require for the facility in order to prevent any confusion and misunderstandings in the future. We've reviewed the entire project and what remaining permit and fees would be required by the town for that project. We then drafted a memorandum of agreement that Town Council and Council for Indian Hill drafted. I want to stress that there was really good cooperation from Indian Hill with us to get this agreement, to prevent the confusion. And if you go to page, what is that, page 5 in your packet, you have the outline of the of the permit and what's left in terms of licenses for that facility. Now, I spoke with Select Board Member Deegan today, and he raised the issue of the intersection at Farmers, at 119 and Old Air Road. We talked about that during this particular issue. That's an issue that's already been resolved, and it's already been permitted by and it's part of the special permit granted by the planning board. They don't get a certificate of occupancy if that intersection isn't done. So that pretty much addressed that issue. We didn't think it needed to be in this particular document. So I appreciate Josh bringing that up, but that's my response to Josh's concern on that. So if the board is satisfied with this, I would ask you to vote to authorize me to sign this agreement on behalf of the board.
I had two other issues. If you
And
recall.
I just, that one was the main one, according to this one, so.
Okay, board members, Josh, since you got two issues, why don't we hear from you?
Yeah, I mean, I read what's here, and I understand that the sheet metal permit is $73,500 roughly. What I don't understand is why we're waiving a 6% administrative fee.
Oh, the 6% administrative fee is under our previous software that we had before we went to the permitting software. We charge a 6% administrative fee because that went directly to the vendor that was providing the software for us. That's gone away. So that's why we didn't charge that 6%, because we don't pay that fee anymore.
So is everybody else getting a 6%
We're gonna be
waiver?
getting, as a matter of fact, Takashi is proposing that 6% administrative fee go away. It's about $21,000 a year. So yes, Josh.
He's proposing.
Yep.
Then I would suggest that in this agreement that we have, that the 6% administrative fee would be waived based on the future elimination of that administrative fee from all permits, and that if it's not eliminated, then the 6% fee stays.
Fair point.
Okay?
Yep.
So I'd like to see that amended to that effect. The other two issues were, and again, this is something subject to the police department, but for any police details that may be required for the duration of the construction project as it relates to the existing site and/or the reconstruction of the Old Air Road intersection, those costs be borne by the applicant. The third issue is, and I don't want Indian Hill for a moment to think that this is some kind of permit fee or something coming in the future, but in light of the fact of a multi-$100,000 reduction in the permit that was granted based on the advice of town council for us entering into executive session, albeit our previous town council. Had I known the situation, I probably would have voted a different way. And I have discussed this with a couple of the directors of Indian Hill, that I would want to see a performance tax permit ticket charge per ticket of at least $1 per ticket and potentially a few dollars per ticket assessed to recoup some of the value of the building permit fee that we didn't get. And that I want to make sure that while it may not be in this agreement, that it's public knowledge that I've been talking about that since the very beginning of this, and I want to make sure that the board understands this, the press understands this, and the public understands that part of the reduction consideration, at least by this board member, was based on our ability to put a local ticket tax on the tickets in the future.
Yes, I certainly recall those discussions. I see the question in the hall. We'll get to after Allison. Thank you. Allison?
Is that something?
Yeah.
Okay. So I agree with what you're saying, Mark, that the intersection, that the final certificate of occupancy requires that intersection be done. I think that for me, the intent of this document before us is to really spell out and clarify everything, so I would still love to see it included, but that's more of an aside at this point. When we spoke earlier, Mark, a few days ago, I had questioned whether it was clear to both parties that this summary of permit fees and things is only up until that first CO is issued, that this is kind of for the initial build-out. This does not, cover any period beyond that.
That is correct.
And you were gonna check, I think, with town council to make sure that
Yes.
that's
And
what
that
was
is
the
correct.
outcome of that. So
Yep.
that
That is correct, Allison.
town council felt that this document is
So-
clear.
Yep.
So has that been inserted, or will it be inserted? I'm not,
are you directing me to insert the intersection? You direct me to do that, I'll go back to council and say that needs to be added.
Well, I'm trying to understand specifically what Allison,
Right, so my concern that I had raised with Mark was that, to me, this document wasn't, extremely clear that these permit fees are only kind of for the initial build-out.
okay.
That if in 5 years they wanna add on something else, that's totally independent of this.
Well, you know, it could be based on, once you get the occupancy permit,
Right.
anything after you get that occupancy permit is
Right.
new.
So that's what I was looking for, some reference that this agreement covers the period through the issuance of the first CO. Mark, I think, felt that that was very clear in this document, and that he was gonna check with town council to make sure it was clear.
Is that
I don't know
covered
where others
under
fall
this
on
modifications clause?
That's the part that Allison and I talked to town council. In the event of modifications, the party shall cooperate to confirm the full scope amount of payment of any additional municipal charges arising from such modifications. So if all of a sudden Indian Hill comes back and says, by the way, we're putting on another addition, that's a modification.
Right.
That would require an additional permit. That's what I thought Allison and I were talking about, and I think I read this section to you when you and I discussed it. But if you want it more clear, town council thinks that's clear, but if the board is looking for better clarity, which I'm fully in support of more clarity, you tell me what you want me to do.
Yeah,
Becky? Yeah.
well,
Oh, I'm sorry, I'll get to you, Connie, I apologize.
I do think that the more the better in this agreement, and it should say, it should be specific that it only covers till the issuance of an occupancy permit. I think that language about the intersection should also be included, because it just sort of, without it
Right.
there, it leaves open the possibility that they start construction of what was agreed to, and they find some, huge amount of ledge or something, and it all of a sudden increases the cost, and they don't wanna have to pay it. They think that they shouldn't have to, and I think that we should expect that what has been agreed to will be paid for no matter what they find. And also the provision that Josh mentioned, that police details that are required when they're doing that work, and when they, at any other time until they get their occupancy permit, are also gonna be paid for by them. So I'm gathering from what you said, Mark, that town council has reviewed this.
Town council drafted it in conjunction with Indian Hills council.
Okay.
I did not draft this document.
I don't see how you can include this, in point number 6 here in the list, how you can include a phrase that says, but not to exceed $30 to $100. I mean, that's kind of missing the point. I don't get that.
If it's a residential permit, it's $30. If it's a commercial permit, it's $100. That's all that says.
But you
Part of
can't
the
have
sign
something,
bylaw.
you
On the
can't
sign
technically
bylaw,
have
that's the
something,
signage.
you can't technically have something not exceed 2 different numbers.
Right.
It would have to be not to exceed
Just like
$100.
consistent with the charges, the permit fees within the sign bylaw.
That was the intent of that sentence.
Okay.
I didn't draft it.
So we can clarify that, that'd be great.
Yeah.
John, you got your hand up patiently, thank you.
Well, didn't you have Connie next?
Sure, Connie, John is, delegated to you.
Thank you, sir. I have 2 questions, actually. One of them goes back to Josh's comment regarding the ability to have a performance tax on tickets. Is that something that this board has voted on, or is planning to vote on, or how does that happen?
Well, what I would like to do is get a meeting having Indian Hill representatives present, maybe between the town manager and initially maybe myself, with the board's permission, to broach the subject. I have already let them know that it's something that I'm considering. Before we do that, I think the board should have a general discussion as a whole to see if there's support amongst the board for a local ticket tax. But prior to even doing that, I think we need to go to town council to see if it's legal. I certainly know that in other communities, I've seen local ticket tax and local surcharges applied to venues that I've attended performances at, and it's written right on the ticket. So I think we just need to look at the legality of that, decide as a board if we'd like to do it. There would be no net costs other than turning over the funds from Indian Hill to the town of Groton for doing that. If they're gonna charge $25 for a performance, it's $26 for the performance, or $27, whatever this board decides to do. But I think that there's gonna be costs associated with this, and let's remember that Indian Hill is tax exempt, And we will be getting nothing other than the individuals that go to the school or come to the performances to shop and or eat in Groton. And other than that, we'll have to deal with all the other traffic, road cleanup, and everything else that goes along with it.
Okay, thank you. And my second question, excuse me, is in regard to the change at 119 and Old Air Road. Is there still a plan for a sidewalk to traverse Prescott Common?
That was the
Yes.
planning board's purview, I believe, because.
Yes, there is,
There is.
but I don't believe it's been entirely agreed yet exactly where that's gonna be, where it's gonna go across.
Okay.
But there will be a crosswalk that connects Old Air Road, both sides of Old Air Road for the continuation of safe passage down towards CBS.
So that's part of the agreement.
That's part of the changes that they would be required to, they are required by their special permit to make.
I guess I really don't know what the changes to the intersection are going to be.
The planning board head, if you don't mind,
Go ahead.
I believe it was Gary Hebert, who was formerly with Chase
We had
Spofford
two
and
traffic
Thorndike.
engineers
and-
look at all this, theirs and one
Yeah.
that we hired.
So needless to say, there were two traffic engineers, they studied the intersection, they made recommendations for squaring off the intersection as you're coming up Old Air Road, heading on the left-hand side of the intersection, so you're not coming in at that obtuse angle, but you would come in at a 90-degree angle. I believe one of the sidewalk configuration scenarios went down past Halsey Platt's house and then came out on the narrow side of the triangle, and then put a crosswalk down there, and then a secondary crosswalk to in front of the house that's owned by Susan Daly, then heading up to connect to the Mass Highway sidewalks that are being put in. I don't know if you followed that, but you know what I'm talking about. That was one scenario, and I think there was another one that was originally talked about it going at the top along 119, but there was problems with the angle of the slope in terms of putting that in up there. So one of those two scenarios is going to work along with the reconfiguration of that, and then putting a double-loaded traffic lane on the right-hand side. So if you're coming from the mobile station, there would be two traffic lanes that exited out to 119 from Old Air Road, and one turning lane created on Route 119 to specifically turn into Old Air Road and allow through traffic to go by. That was my recollection of that.
Yeah, it's close, but there's an actual document that
Thank you.
describes all this
Something like that.
that the planning board has on file. So it may be worth, taking a look at that specific piece of.
But the point about including it in here is important, because to Becky's point is that, I think their estimated cost was $500,000. Well, that might have been in dollars when this thing was permitted, but by the time they do this, I think it had to be completed 6 months prior to occupancy permit, something like that. So this is in future dollars, plus who knows what they're gonna run into. And then all of a sudden they'll say, well, we never agreed to police details, so the town of Groton should, I'm not saying they did or didn't, okay? What I'm saying, so please don't print that. I'm saying that to take the ambiguity out of it, if you say that the police details associated with that portion of the construction needs to be borne by the applicant, then they know there's another fee that we're not just throwing at them later on.
All right, so the board
So-
wants clarification on this, that the thing goes through to issuance of occupancy, language on the 119 Old Air intersection and police details, clarify the sign language, and you want me to check with town council if the ticket tax is legal.
And the
And this-
6% administrative
The
fee.
6% waiver of the administrative fee is gonna happen in the future if it's decided to give it to everybody, right?
Okay, so I think town manager's gonna come back with another proposal in a future
Oh, I'm
week.
not asking you to vote this right now.
Yeah, so we're gonna table this for now and John Geiger. John,
It
so
doesn't
everybody
matter
knows-
which side I sit on, you.
It
I
does,
see.
it does. I'd like to get us into executive session at 9 o'clock out of consideration for our Mr. Deegan member.
Well, I have a very short item that I wanna make, and that's on details, okay? My recollection of the process with the planning board, and I was the chair at the time that this whole thing came through, was there was a lot of dialogue between Indian Hill and the former police chief. I don't know how much of that was reduced to some sort of memorialization of what was agreed to. I know there was discussion about which intersections would have to have detail officers, depending on the, I think, on the size of, you know, number of
Performance.
tickets they were gonna issue. There was talk about getting, semi-permanent lighting onto poles to illuminate where those officers would stand during the hours of darkness.
But
And,
that's after they're in operation,
beg your
right?
pardon?
That's
No.
after they're in operation.
That's correct.
Yes.
Yes, well, I'm talking, I think what Josh was talking about is police details that are required prior to getting an occupancy permit.
But their commitment to do that, we need to understand what, in fact, the current police chief believes the obligations of Indian Hill are relative to the management of traffic. Whether it,
Even after they open, that's a good point.
That's a good point. Okay, thanks, Mark, for presenting this and going back to town council to get it revised. Appreciate the work on that.
Hi, Mr. Chairman, Select Board Member Geiger had drafted a capital definition policy.
Mark, since we can't get through that in 10, 15 minutes, let's table that to next week, please.
Okay?
It's pretty simple.
Let's do number 5, determination, pursue green communities designation.
I'll turn that over to Select Board Member Pine, who drafted my town manager's report for me. Thank you, Becky.
I think it's fairly comprehensive, and I guess I think that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but what I think we need to do is commit to scheduling a meeting at some point in January, to bring in other boards to meet with us and the public to go into more hear the presentation from the expert at the state level about what this is all about, so that we can make a decision at that point about going to town meeting to get a vote on the stretch code.
So you want me to schedule, your recommendation to the board is that the committee, our committee, you and me and Kevin and Takashi and everybody's
Right.
recommending that we move forward with this. And we'd like to bring Kelly Brown to a future meeting of the select board, to have a public meeting, invite the planning board and others to make the formal presentation and put an article on the warrant at the Springtown meeting for the stretch code. Is that what I heard? I think the board should probably make a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Second.
So it's been moved and seconded that we intend to move forward with discussions and meetings regarding attaining green communities designation. And I've requested that the Green Communities Coordinator for the Central Region attend a future meeting. Any other discussion?
And I would just suggest that that meeting should not be a Monday night. I think we should have it on a different evening. I think it'll be, given that we already know that
We'll
we
look
have.
to you then to recommend a meeting day that you'd like that to
Right.
have on, and work through the various committees. I'll help work through the committees to get that on the
Right,
schedule.
I mean,
I'll
it'd
work
be,
with Becky.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. All those Allison, yep.
I just wanted to make a request kind of formally. I think in conjunction with moving forward and getting this information, I would like to see some sort of memo, formalized something that talks about why we haven't done this as of yet, what the concerns were in the past when we looked at it, and then some understanding, you know, given that the professional who's coming in to speak to us is very much in favor of this program for everyone. Some research needs to be done about what the potential downside or concerns, detriment, what should you be aware of.
That we've done, that's a great point, Allison, and I think Becky will tell you, I don't wanna speak for her, but the committee really looked at all of that, and to answer your first question, why this wasn't done before, a lot of it had to do with the light department and our inability to do it because we had a municipal light plant. Since that has been resolved and the stretch code has been incorporated, a major portion of the stretch code has been incorporated into the building code, there really isn't that much of an impact on new construction. As a matter of fact, we have numbers that show the added cost of the stretch code to a new homeowner in town, to new construction in town. So yeah, I think we can put that together,
right,
Becky.
and I could have included that actually, that we did have a committee that looked into this a number of years ago, I think after the program was first created, and decided that it was not appropriate for Groton to proceed at that point. And the major sticking point was that at that point, there was a provision that potentially would have required our electric light company to charge a surcharge to all of the customers, to all of us, because there were a municipal light department, and I don't exactly understand why that was. That has been removed, it's no longer an issue. Lots of other municipalities that have municipal light departments have now proceeded. And that was the first, essentially, that was the first question we asked at the first informational kind of meeting we had when we were talking about the possibility of going forward. And Kevin Kelly, our manager, guild manager, was there and said absolutely, without that stumbling block, there was no reason not to go forward.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table. Without further discussion, I'll take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstentions? Okay, I heard that unanimous. Mr. Town Manager, Mark, would you please reschedule number 4 for 12:10, number 6 for 12:10, and under the other business, the discussion board selection process for 12:18, and then we are already going to have a future meeting regarding the CPC, right? So, okay. Can we go to ongoing issues, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Dawn and I went out today to the Senior Center building project to inspect what has gone on out there, and are extremely pleased with the progress on the steel construction. We were told today that the carpenters are coming in to put up the walls and the sheet rock and all that stuff that has to be done to enclose the building for winter conditions. So that is ongoing, and I would say that they told us today that the actual substantial completion date in their mind is actually 2 weeks earlier than what the contract calls for. So we feel very good about the progress of the construction project. So we're very pleased with the way that's going. And that's the only update I have on ongoing issues tonight.
What's up with the?
The sidewalk installation?
Yeah.
They were out there working. As a matter of fact, they have a lot of pavement that's been put down on the sidewalk. It's a mass highway project. I assume they're trying to get it done because they're out there working every day now this week, so hopefully it'll be done soon.
I can report that I drove down there today and it looked way more better than it has been. To be not very grammatical here.
Yeah.
My question is
I
the
think they got all the
asphalt
blacktop down.
that's down, is that the final coat or is there gonna be something else on top?
I
Do you know?
believe that's the final coat.
You think it is?
I do.
Can we get some sort of formal request or something from Mass Highway as to when they'll be finished with this?
Okay, any liaison reports?
Yes.
Okay, I heard yes, so Becky.
I'm the Community Preservation Liaison. There was an editorial in the Boston Globe, I think it was on Saturday, that I would like,
Yep.
I don't know, was that?
It was shared.
Was
as
it
well.
shared? And I'd like us to discuss at our next meeting, potentially writing a letter to our state legislators, urging them to support.
Have you had
What
a
was recommended?
discussion with the CPC on that item? Is this truly liaison or is this
No.
something?
I have not,
So,
sorry.
Okay, so we need to.
It's my intention to share it with them also.
Please, as part of that, would you please connect with them and ask them their opinion on this, so that we know we're acting on their behalf?
For sure.
That'd be a
Right.
great
Yes, yes.
addition to next week's meeting. And it is planned to be on that agenda.
Thank you.
Anything further, Allison, thank you.
Yep, so I just wanted to kind of give folks a quick update. I went last week to the school district, the school committee, had 2 forums basically back to back. The earlier of the 2 was on half-day, full-day kindergarten, and starting to look at that and get some input from parents and community members. There were probably about 40 parents there. A lot of discussion and debate. It was very interesting. I don't think there was any tremendous outpouring of new information, and the school committee and administration haven't really started to look at anything, but they wanted to hear right out, what the community and parents were thinking about. So that was very interesting. The second part of it was a discussion around high school start time, which wasn't, some parents left, some came. I think there were probably about 30 parents there. And interestingly, there were 3 or 4 current high school students who, were tasked with answering every question anyone in the room had had about teenagers for the last 7,000 years. So that was interesting. At least one of those students recognized that they could potentially be very, very powerful if they were to go to school committee meetings routinely. So that was the same kind of thing very preliminary, talking about alternatives and costs potentially. One of the concerns that often came up was that athletics would be impacted. The consensus there from the athletic league that we are part of was that the start time could go to 8 o'clock basically without impacting any athletic practices or competitions, so that was interesting. They had done some preliminary looking at kind of flipping high school and elementary, and as you might expect, it's all very complicated. They're talking about looking at alternatives that would potentially merge ridership at 2 schools together into 1 bus run. Basically, the end was kind of stay tuned. There's a ton more work to do, but it was interesting.
I'm very happy to see that the school committee is moving forward with this. This has been discussed for 3 years now, 4 years now, and I'm glad to see that it's starting to get some, traction in the committee as a project that they're considering. And
Yep.
I don't expect to see anything for a few years, and change like this is challenging and fraught with contractual issues and all kinds of other things, but I'm glad that it's being discussed and being considered, especially for the benefit and safety of our children, so.
And I think that the students in particular were extremely clear and very unified that kind of every minute of delay that they could get in the start time would be very much appreciated, and that they feel it's very beneficial. The general consensus was there were a few teachers there that kind of kids aren't waking up until about an hour into the school day. And that's really not particularly where these students are driving previous to waking up in that scenario, really not what we want to be seeing.
Yes, we'll teach them to drink coffee early is what we do.
Well, yes, but some of the teachers don't allow coffee in their
Yeah,
classes,
right.
so it's a little complicated.
It is complicated. Becky?
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I wanted to say one more thing about the green communities.
Yeah.
I want to correct something. It's not in this report, but in our goals. I had written that the process involved a second town meeting vote in the fall, and I think I want to retract that because I don't think I'm correct on that. We'll get that clarified when we hear from Kelly Brown.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, thank you. Any other liaison reports? Okay, minutes.
Move that we approve the minutes of November 26th as presented.
What
That
page
was
is
your
that on?
listing of the
That is
votes.
on page
There were 2 parts of it, I think.
12.
Of our packet?
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't.
I think there was
That's
an
the
error
last
in
page.
this.
It's the last page.
I don't think I was at this meeting.
I don't think.
It was
That is
just
correct.
last week.
This was last week, so it started with, the first part is kind of Dawn's minutes, and then it
Here for a little bit.
I was here the week before last.
it morphs into mine.
So I wasn't present. so-
Yeah, so Don, we just need to make an edit that Mr. Deegan was absent.
I remember I wasn't here.
Raise your hand if you weren't there.
Okay, with that amendment, are there anything further on these meetings?
I just think
These
we need to,
meeting minutes.
we need to
Doesn't
be really
reference
clear
me
that we
saying
go
anything,
back
does it?
and review and approve the second chunk of minutes,
All right.
which were the ones that I took. They're referenced here, which
Oh.
is fine, but
Okay,
we need
I
to
understand
make
what you're
sure that
talking
we
about.
I was texting.
review those.
I'm sorry, I did not read these
I gotta
minutes.
fix this. There's another change.
Okay, so it sounds like we may not be ready
Yeah.
to approve these anyway, so let's table this
Yeah.
and,
Don, can we talk about this under number 3, please?
can you take that offline?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. With no further ado, I'd like a motion to enter executive session.
I move that this board enter executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 39, subsection 23B, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the government's bargaining or litigating position. Also to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, or to actually consider collective bargaining and/or contract negotiations with non-union personnel. Specific reason is to discuss the fire chief contract.
He's reading from a document we
Second.
have that has the explicit
Oh, I
outline.
didn't have that in my head.
Yeah.
Well, at first I was really impressed. I'm a little concerned, does our executive session posting not have to include some of that?
That's the law that I just read.
No, the executive session has to talk about it when you read it you're supposed to read it out like that. I mean.
But the posting doesn't have to
Posting doesn't-
include the
no,
reason?
no. Posting
Town
does have the
clerk
reason.
did this
It
posting,
says
so I
it's
assume
clause
it's
The
two.
motion has to have it.
Yeah, the motion has to have, the posting says it's clause two, which is what he read.
No, the motion has to have it.
Clause 2 of what?
Chapter 30A, Section 21.
The executive session.
That doesn't have to be on here?
No,
No, it's not chapter 39, it's chapter 30A that was amended, that's correct.
I just said that, yeah.
Yeah, I amend my motion to chapter 38.
Okay.
The town clerk did this posting for me, so I assume he did it properly.
Okay, so you made a
And
motion,
not adjourn into regular session,
not return it.
not
Thank
return.
you.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any, I'll take a vote. We have to have a roll call vote to go into executive session.
Oh, Pine, aye.
Manugie and I.
Peace, aye.
Deegan, aye.
Geiger, aye.
Thank you. Noah, thank you very much.
Anderson, I.